Bosses. What is the most messed up reason you have had to fire an employee for? Oh God, I've waited for this moment for a year now. I work in an oil and gas in situ plant, which is located a couple of 100 kilometers. I'm Canadian, north of civilization. We have giant complexes that house over 3,000 workers at a time. We have our own airport here, and we have planes that we used to fly workers home on their week off. These complexes are set up like hotels, with a long hallway with 42 rooms in each wing. Each one of those wings contains a washroom with 8 tiny washrooms inside of it. In each of the 8 rooms, there was a shower and a toilet. Okay, now that I've prefaced the story, onto the explanation of events. One day I got a call from a very angry cleaner who, upon opening one of the stalls, had been greeted by a big steaming turd, which was in the shower. She was obviously very upset, and rightfully so. That particular wing housed a section of my 380 employees. Chalking it up to a drunken accident from the night before or someone who had an accident, we apologized to the cleaner and went on with a regular workday. The following morning, the same cleaner called again to tell me the same story. Amazingly, the toilet is located literally less than 1 foot away from the shower door, so this whole shower incident was intentional. For the next 6 days, the guys in the dorm and the cleaners would open this door to find one of the shower stalls full of crap. This happened so frequently that the guys would laugh and refer to the morning showers as a game of crap roulette. I spent 4 days intricately tracking the occurrences of the reported incident, cross-referencing all of the 300 employees' shift schedules, sick days, vacation time, etc., and narrowing it down to one guy who set up a sting, Operation Stinky Shower, and caught the guy sneaking out of the stall. I obviously had to let him go. It was the most awkward termination I've ever had to do. As he was a union worker, our policy states that there needs to be a representative of his union, an HR person, and myself present for each termination of employment. I had to explain to a 47-year-old man in front of his friend and neighbor at home, as well as the very attractive 34-year-old female HR rep, that he was being released from employment because of what he did in the public showers. His response? Doesn't everyone do it in the shower? You do it at home all the time and just use the handheld shower thingy to rinse it down the drain. There was no shower wand thing in camp, so how was I supposed to get rid of it? This was the great stinky incident, and has consistently resulted in me winning the crappiest firing ever award. Story 2. McDonald's general manager here. Our store opens at 5 a.m. and closes at midnight. As such, our openers arrive at 4 a.m. and our closers are normally gone by 2 a.m., plus or minus a few hours depending on the amount of pre-close finished, which is due to business. Recently, we've begun hiring for the summer to fill out a roster, and we have a couple of new closers. One of them is the easiest chick I've ever seen. She came to her interview in clothes I wouldn't dream of letting my daughter look at in a department store. I have a manager specifically for hiring and customer interface, and how he let her slip through the cracks, I will never know. Anyway, I arrived promptly at 4 a.m. and noticed that all of our equipment in the office had been sloppily rearranged on her desk and that some of the equipment was missing. I pulled up last night's time punch record and saw that closers didn't leave until 3:30, which is ridiculously late due to the low amount of sales we had in the late hours before. So I then went to disarm the alarm system and noticed that all the camera lights were off on the way there. I went back into the office and looked at our security page. All cameras had been disabled at 1:45. At 1:40, all the closers had left the store except that girl and my closing manager. Fortunately, it is impossible to disable the office camera. My closing manager didn't know that. I called him and told him he needed to get in the store right away. He came about 10 minutes later with his mistress in the car. I pulled him into the back and told him what I found and how I uncovered his scheme. He begged me not to fire him because his pregnant wife would leave him. He then tried to spin it off that he had been forced by a 100-pound girl. I pulled Barbie in and talked to her alone. She told me he gave her $500, stolen from our deposit, showed me the cash, and then told me that she would give me the same deal for free if I promised not to tell. I promptly sat them both down, but didn't leave them alone, and called my regional manager. After I told them the story and revealed I had recorded the conversations with them both via smartphone in my pocket, I live in a single-party consent state. Although I didn't intend to use it as evidence, I wanted to cover my butt when they predictably started lying to save their own skins. They were both fired on the spot and are banned from all Raleigh region McDonald's. They're soon having charges pressed against them. By far the craziest thing I've had happen with my employees is that the majority of them are intelligent and hardworking, and I would go to bat for them to go through great effort to defend them any day. Come on, you all know why he let that slip through the cracks. Dirty deeds in the workplace happen more often than you think. Story 3. At an ad agency, I was sitting in a meeting with a $10 million account client. From my agency, the owner, president, account director, creative director, media director, me, account manager, and my coordinator are in the room. My coordinator was this young bird right out of college, very ambitious with lots of energy, but very outspoken and brash. I've had to speak with her a number of times about keeping quiet in meetings, focusing on taking notes and waiting until afterwards to ask questions, not arguing with anything anyone says in the meeting, or making any grossed-out faces. Out of habit, whenever anyone said anything she didn't agree with, she'd make this disgusted face as if someone just farted. She always cried when I had to rein her in and remind her that she was overstepping her boundaries. Before the meeting, I had a quick recap with her, saying that she was there to listen and take notes, and that not even I was going to do any talking but merely to support the directors. Anyway, during the meeting, while we were talking about target audiences, she decided to chirp up and talk about herself and her group of friends, about how they should be who we decide to target. She starts going into detail about the reasons why. I put my hand slowly over her notebook to try to signal to her to stop, but she had already gone off the rails. The owner finally stepped up and basically told her to shut up right in the middle of it, and she started crying. It was so embarrassing. The meeting ended quickly after, and we agreed to finish it at the client's office the next day instead. After the meeting, I sat her down in another room with her, and she started crying to me about how pissed she was that the owner made her look like an idiot in the meeting and that she was so mad that she was threatening to quit. I tried to get her to understand why the owner had to step in and keep her in line, but she just couldn't be reasoned with. She was fired by the end of the day, and in the exit meeting, she was crying, saying that we didn't have a good enough reason and begging for a second chance. It was brutal. Story 4. I'm not saying construction workers are some crappy people because everyone in my family is a construction worker. You have tradesmen, then you have guys that show up at these big sites to work months or only weeks at a time. Every other year or so, we have to hire a lot of temporary workers for temporary plant shutdowns. Most of the time, half of them leave when you hand them the whiz cup for the medication test. So we had a new batch in. A lot of guys come to work in groups, 3 or 4 of them ride together, and if you fire one of them, you lose all of them because that is their only ride. Anyway, one new group comes in. They've been working for a couple of days, and one of them, Jim, is talking to my brother. He tells my brother about his toddler daughter. She has some kind of brain tumor and is in and out of the hospital. She has a slew of health problems and isn't expected to live a long life. My brother had a daughter the same age at that time. The guy is pretty torn up talking about her and shows my brother all the pictures he carries in his wallet. She talks about all the different hospitals she's been in and out of, the different types of specialists she has to see, etc. Pretty sad stuff. You hate to hear about a child suffering so much. Fast forward 2 or 3 days. One of the guys that rides with Jim has been laid off from work. He shows up one morning and my brother's like, "Where the hell have you been?" The dude is like, "Man, I'm sorry for not calling, but my daughter has brain cancer and had to take her to the ER. What? My brother looks at me. "Did you hear that?" I did the workbook. I had the guy's W-2. Single, no dependents. He calls Jim over. So we got Jim and the liar there together. My brother looked at them and said, "Whichever one of you two doesn't have a sick daughter, grab your stuff and get the hell out of here." Jim looked perplexed for a second, but the other guy just turned around, picked up his things, and left without saying another word. We gave Jim the benefit of the doubt because he seemed really sincere. And the information he gave us about his daughter seemed pretty credible, but the sad thing is, we run up against some pretty worthless human beings in the crap you hear. Story 5. I had to fire someone for doing her job. It was seriously the most peculiar nonsense. I was a manager at a hotel near an airport, and we were woefully understaffed for a hotel of our size. There are almost 200 rooms, thousands of square feet of banquet space, and one desk agent on duty at any time. I made a strict do not leave the desk policy because corporate was specific about the phone being answered on or before the second ring without exception. We didn't have a cordless phone, so someone had to be right by the phone at all times. Our director of sales came down one day and asked my newest hire to go find me. My agent, bless her heart, explained that she couldn't leave the desk and that corporate instituted a no cell phones in the building policy, so there was no way of reaching me while I was doing a security sweep. Apparently, my desk agent staunchly refused and told the director of sales where I might be and that she could find me herself. The next day, I came into 4 emails and a voicemail from the president of our company saying that our director of sales had lodged a formal complaint of insubordination against the new girl and had given an ultimatum that either the new girl get fired or the DOS quit. The DOS was phenomenal at selling and brought in millions of dollars in new contracts in under 3 months of being there, so I either had to terminate her immediately or I would be replaced. Worst firing ever. We were both confused and angry, but I had to remain stern and boss-like while escorting her off the property. Then I was told to never hire inflexible people ever again or they would replace me. I quit that job a month later. Story 6. I didn't fire him, but I think there's a lesson to be learned here that I want to share. We own an engineering firm in Atlanta and hired a young intern. He lived in his fraternity house and often showed up late and hungover, but he was a nice kid. On Monday and Tuesday, he didn't show up and we assumed he was hungover and sleeping it off. It then occurred to me that we sort of had an obligation to check on him in case he was truly missing. We called his cell phone and didn't get an answer or a return call. We then checked with the intern office at the school and they had no information. I was on the verge of tracking down his parents when we finally heard from him. It turns out he had gotten a DUI on Friday night and rather than call his parents to bail him out, he called some friends. The friends spent the next 4 days trying to bail him out of jail when he was actually in another jail, not a place any 19-year-old college student wants to spend any time. It's about a 10-story windowless building filled with really nasty people. The friends finally figured it out and bailed him out. Also, in the meantime, we found lots of videos on his computer as we were trying to get clues as to whether he was okay or missing. He showed up, apologized, and asked to keep his job. I agreed with the condition that, from that point on, he would call his parents instead of his dumb friends if he got into any more trouble. And I let him in their office talk to him about his video watching at work. Damn, they straightened him out and gave him another chance, even with the videos. Employer of the year right there. Halfway through and you're still here, huh? Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more intense stories. Story 7. I had a soldier with a tattoo that went up the back of his neck who got a waiver when he joined in the late 2000s. In 2002, or thereabouts, the Army changed its tattoo policy that all waiver tattoos had to be reevaluated, and if not deemed in regulation, the soldier either removed it or was discharged. This kid was a good troop. There were no discipline issues, and I'd recommend him for promotion to sergeant. His tattoo was a tribal-ish design of his late kid's name. The brigade commander, Sergeant Major, was insistent that anything outside the new criteria be removed, so the soldier was kicked out. The kid wouldn't change it because it meant something. He got kicked out faster than anyone I've ever seen. Me, my platoon sergeant, and the first sergeant all wrote letters of support, but to no avail. He struggled for a while after getting out, but went back to college and got a job in IT, I think. Good guy. Story 8. I worked as a human resources manager in a large department store in downtown DC. One day I was in the security office when I saw what the agents were watching. I almost crapped myself. A huge man had come in. He was almost 7 feet tall and easily 300 pounds. He is wandering around, acting strange, but not doing anything substantial enough to warrant getting rid of him. He walked over to the men's department and picked up a belt. He then approached the associate standing behind the counter. While he's standing there, he's whipping the belt up and down. By this time, a couple of security guys had positioned themselves nearby. As he gets to the counter, he says something to the associate. She is about 5 feet 2 and 100 pounds. All of a sudden, he reaches over the counter and charges over the belt. The closest agent jumps on him. This guy, too, looks like a hobbit compared to him, but he manages to get him backed up against a glass column and then get him cuffed. Meanwhile, the girl comes over and tries to leap up and slap him. She's so little you can't tell if she even reached his face. Cops came and then he was taken away. The whole thing was on video. The next thing you know, law students from one of the schools in town got involved. He saw the video. It turned out I had to fire the poor little girl because she slapped him when he was cuffed. I personally wanted to take a Louisville Slugger to the guy. That day made me sick. Story 9. At the time, I headed up a web development team of 7, and one guy was always a bit creepy. But he is quite a nice guy. We used IRC, Internet Relay Chat, a lot to discuss web development problems in the Freenode community and to progress development. But I have to admit, this guy seemed to be on there quite a bit more than everyone else. One day, walking past him at his desk, I noticed the old quick minimize going on as he turned his chat window down, which immediately caught my attention. So after that, I logged onto his MIRC and waited a few days. Turns out he wasn't really working on web development bits in IRC, but was having cyber meetings with someone online. That was not an easy conversation to keep a straight face for. Story 10. I wasn't the boss at the time, but I was one of the cooks. The AGM, Assistant General Manager, was one of the nicest guys around and so fun to work with. As a cook, I get a percentage of the sales as a tip every second Friday, opposite our paychecks, kind of like a mini paycheck. It was nice. It would hold on to them for 3 months after you started, and if you stayed there, they would give them to you in a large bulk. Awesome. But when it came around to my turn, I got about $150. I wasn't aware at the time, but I was young and stoked on $150. 2 weeks later, I got another one, and it was like 60. I was like, if I get 60 after 2 weeks, how does 3 months get me 150? Turns out the AGM was stealing all our tips. Not just the first one either, half or so of our bi-weekly ones. Stealing the branch's money and ended up owing somewhere upwards of 60 grand. What a jerk. Story 11. When I was a security guard at a vehicle patrol site, we had a similar issue. 4 of the 5 vehicles were automatic, 1 was a standard Jeep. A dude who had been there for 4 months got into 2 minor accidents. Clipping a wall and hitting a ditch with the automatics before he ended up getting the standard Jeep, at which time it was discovered that he'd somehow made it all the way through the hiring process without anyone noticing that his state ID was only an ID and not a driver's license. Dude didn't have one. He couldn't drive, per se. He'd been coming to and from work with his girlfriend dropping him off and picking him up, and he'd just winged it with the auto transmissions. But the night he got the stick Jeep, that was that. He had no idea how to operate a clutch. He got canned and some major house cleaning occurred in HR over that one. Someone needs to get their HR in HR. Story 12. Okay, I'm not a boss, but this happened at a place I worked, and I witnessed it firsthand. I used to work at a supermarket as a cashier. One day, as another cashier was leaving work, he was also a good friend, he walked to his car only to discover his tires had been slashed. The supermarket had an extensive security system with cameras everywhere, so my friend walked back in and told my manager what happened. They go back to check the tapes, and right there on camera is another employee slashing my friend's tires. They immediately removed the employee from the register he was working at and brought him into the back room to question. They show him the videotape and he denies it. They're all completely blown away. This guy was not only caught red-handed and shown the evidence, but he then proceeded to deny it. He was obviously fired immediately. At that point, you could have blamed his alter ego. The, "That wasn't me, that was Patricia" line might have worked. After these bosses' revelations, check out the other termination stories over in Have you ever seen someone get fired on the spot? Story 3 is well-deserved. See you there.